It all started when Karen Dawson moved into a house 3 doors down from mine. From day one, she made it clear that she was going to be a problem. Within her first week, she had already reported 3 neighbors to the Homeowners Association, HOA, for minor infractions. One received a notice for leaving their trash bin visible from the street, another for a basketball hoop that had stood in place for over a decade, and the third for having excessively loud wind chimes. At first, I managed to avoid her radar. I took pride in maintaining my home, not because of HOA rules, but because I valued my property. Then, one random Tuesday morning in April, as I was on a Zoom call with clients, I heard an unusual sound coming from my backyard. At first, I ignored it, but as the noise grew louder, my gut told me something was wrong. I stepped away from my meeting to investigate, and what I saw shocked me to my core. Karen, standing in my yard, chainsaw in hand, trying to cut down my beloved 100-year-old oak tree. I stood frozen for a moment, trying to process the sheer absurdity of what I was witnessing. Karen Dawson, my new nightmare of a neighbor, was in my backyard with a chainsaw, hacking away at the base of my century-old oak tree. I snapped out of my shock and shouted over the noise, "Karen! What the hell are you doing on my property?" She turned off the chainsaw and looked up at me, completely unfazed, as if she were trimming her own hedges. With a fake, syrupy smile, she replied, "Good morning, Mark. I'm just taking care of this tree issue for you." I blinked. "Excuse me? There is no issue. This is my tree, on my property, and you're trespassing." Karen sighed, as if I were the one being difficult. According to HOA Bylaw 47.8, trees taller than 35 feet are not allowed in Oakwood Estates because of potential storm damage. Your tree is at least 45 feet tall. I measured it myself. I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "Karen, that bylaw does not exist. I've read all the HOA regulations, and even if it did, you are not the law. You can't just walk onto someone's property and start cutting down their tree." For the first time, her smile faltered, but only for a second. Then she beamed at me even wider. "You must have missed the memo. I was just elected HOA president last week. If you had attended the meeting, you would have known." I narrowed my eyes. This was news to me. But regardless of her position, she still had no right to be here. "Karen, I don't care if you're the Queen of England. You cannot come onto my property and destroy my tree. This is criminal trespassing and property damage." Karen rolled her eyes. "Oh, Mark, stop being so dramatic. This tree is a hazard. Not to mention it drops leaves in my yard every fall." I stared at her in disbelief. "Karen, your house is 3 doors down and across the street. How is this tree even remotely your problem?" She ignored me completely, turned the chainsaw back on, and resumed cutting. That's when I pulled out my phone. "I'm calling the police right now. This is your final warning." The moment she saw me dialing, she let out an exaggerated sigh, shut off the chainsaw, and stepped back. "Fine, but expect an official violation notice. You'll be fined daily until this issue is resolved." She grabbed her things and stomped off, her blonde bob bouncing with every angry step. As soon as she left, I called my friend Thomas, a lawyer specializing in property law. After explaining what happened, he told me to document everything, take photos, file a police report, and install security cameras immediately. Little did I know, this was only the beginning. The moment Karen left my property, I got to work. I photographed everything: the half-cut trunk, the chainsaw marks, even the footprints she left in the dirt. Then I called the police. About 30 minutes later, Officers Rodriguez and Chen arrived. They listened carefully as I explained what happened, then inspected the damage to my tree. Officer Rodriguez let out a low whistle as he ran his fingers along the deep cut in the bark. "This is serious," he said. "A tree like this can be worth tens of thousands of dollars. If it's damaged beyond repair, this could be classified as felony property destruction." That got my attention. "Wait, felony?" Officer Chen nodded. "A healthy, mature oak tree can be valued at $40,000 or more. If the damage is bad enough, the district attorney might press charges." I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. Relief that the law was on my side, but anxiety because I had a sinking feeling that Karen wasn't done yet. And I was right. The very next afternoon, I found an official-looking letter in my mailbox. It was from the HOA, citing me for a violation of Bylaw 47.8, the same non-existent rule Karen had mentioned. It came with a $500 fine, plus an extra $100 per day until the issue was resolved. The letter was signed by Karen Dawson, with a signature so large it barely fit on the page. I nearly laughed out loud. Instead, I forwarded the letter to the actual HOA board members and asked for the meeting minutes where this so-called rule had been passed. Within hours, I received multiple emails, all expressing shock and confusion. Turns out, there was no vote, and more importantly, Karen was not the HOA president. A few minutes later, my phone rang. It was James Fisher, the real HOA president. "Mark," he said, "I have no idea what Karen is trying to pull, but she is not the HOA president. We had a meeting last week, but elections aren't until November. She just volunteered for the landscaping committee. Nothing more." I shook my head in disbelief. So she made up a rule, faked an election, and is now handing out bogus fines? "That's exactly what it looks like," James replied. "I'm calling an emergency board meeting to deal with this immediately." That night, my new security cameras arrived, and I spent the entire evening installing them around my house, especially near my beloved oak tree. I hoped that would be the end of it. But then, a massive storm hit, and karma came for Karen Dawson in a way no one saw coming. The storm rolled in fast, heavy rain, howling winds, and lightning tearing through the sky. I spent the morning securing loose objects in my yard and making sure my gutters weren't clogged. Around midday, the power went out. I called the electric company, and they told me a tree had fallen on a power line a few streets away. With nothing else to do, I decided to take a drive around the neighborhood to check out the storm damage. That's when I saw it. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered in front of a house. Karen's house. At first, I thought she might be arguing with someone again, but as I got closer, I saw the real disaster. A massive pine tree had fallen directly onto her roof. The damage was severe. A huge section of the roof had caved in, and water was likely pouring into her house. Fire trucks and emergency vehicles were parked outside, their lights flashing as firefighters assessed the scene. My neighbor, Elena, spotted me and walked over. "You won't believe this," she whispered. "That pine tree has been dead for over 2 years. The previous owners planned to remove it but sold the house before they could. Karen refused to pay for removal, even after multiple warnings that it was dangerous." I couldn't help but shake my head at the irony. The same woman who tried to cut down my healthy oak tree, claiming it was a hazard, had completely ignored a real threat in her own yard. And now, she was paying the price. Just as I was about to leave, I saw Karen storming toward me, her face twisted with rage. "This is your fault," she shrieked, pointing an accusatory finger at me. "You did this!" I blinked in disbelief. Excuse me? How exactly is your dead tree falling on your house my fault? Karen's voice rose for everyone to hear. You reported my tree to the city out of revenge. I know it was you. I frowned. Karen, I didn't even know you had a dead tree until just now. Liar, she spat. First you refused to cut down your dangerous oak, and now you go after me. At this point, neighbors started muttering among themselves, shaking their heads. That's when Elena spoke up. Karen, stop lying. Mark lives 3 houses away, and his tree isn't anywhere near your property. And no one had to report your tree. You ignored the city's warnings for years. More neighbors chimed in, backing me up. Karen's face turned red, but before she could argue more, Officer Rodriguez walked up. Is there a problem here? He asked. Karen immediately launched into her wild conspiracy theory, claiming I had somehow orchestrated the storm and caused the tree to fall. Officer Rodriguez tried to keep a straight face, but I saw the corner of his mouth twitch. So, you're saying Mark controls the weather? Karen stammered. No, but he must have reported it. Rodriguez turned to me. Mark, did you report her tree? No, I said plainly. He nodded, then faced Karen. Miss Dawson, I suggest you focus on repairing your home. If you want to file a complaint, you can do so at the station. Karen huffed. This isn't over, Mark. You'll regret messing with me. I watched her storm back to her half-destroyed house, the wind whipping around her as if karma itself was laughing. Little did I know, she wasn't done yet. For the next few days, things were strangely quiet. Karen's house had visible damage, but she didn't reach out to me, and I didn't hear any more ridiculous accusations. It almost seemed like the storm had finally forced her to back off. Then, on a calm Sunday morning, I heard a knock at my door. When I opened it, I was met with Officer Rodriguez's serious expression. My stomach dropped. Mark, I need to talk to you about Karen Dawson, he said. May I come in? I nodded, stepping aside. As we sat at my kitchen table, he took a deep breath before speaking. Karen was arrested last night, he said. She was caught on your property at 2 a.m. with a chainsaw. I froze. You're kidding. Rodriguez shook his head. Your security cameras recorded everything. A neighbor heard the chainsaw and called 911. When we arrived, she had already cut halfway through your oak tree's trunk. I felt a cold rage settle in my chest. After everything, she had come back to finish the job. Is the tree okay? I asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Rodriguez hesitated. Unfortunately, no, the damage is too severe. An arborist inspected it this morning, and they determined it's a total loss. The tree has to be removed. I closed my eyes, swallowing the grief that hit me like a punch to the gut. That tree wasn't just some plant. It was a landmark, a part of my home. And now, it was ruined because of Karen's insane vendetta. She's facing felony charges now, Rodriguez continued. Given the tree's value and her previous warnings, she's looking at serious legal consequences. The district attorney is considering additional charges for her past attempts as well. I nodded slowly, processing it all. What happens next? You'll need to give another statement, and you might have to testify in court. But on the bright side, your homeowner's insurance should cover the tree removal and possibly even a replacement. I sighed, rubbing my face. This wasn't how I wanted things to go, but at least Karen was finally facing real consequences. After Rodriguez left, I went outside to see the damage for myself. The sight was gut-wrenching. The deep gash in the tree, the raw wood exposed, the yellow caution tape wrapped around the trunk like a death sentence. Neighbors started gathering, offering their condolences. Some looked as if I had lost a family member rather than a tree, and honestly, it felt that way. Then, something unexpected happened. Elena, the same neighbor who had stood up for me against Karen, stepped forward. "We should do something about this," she said. James, the real HOA president, nodded. "Yeah, this isn't just about Mark's tree. It's about the kind of neighborhood we want to be. We should come together." And just like that, a plan started forming. One that would turn this destruction into something meaningful. In the days following Karen's arrest, something unexpected happened. Instead of just watching from the sidelines, my neighbors came together in a way I had never seen before. It started with Elena. She suggested we start a neighborhood watch group to prevent anything like this from happening again. Within hours, dozens of people signed up, agreeing to keep an eye on each other's homes. Then, James, the real HOA president, organized a special meeting to discuss new security measures for the neighborhood. The HOA voted to install surveillance cameras at all entrances and revise property protection policies, ensuring that no one could pull a stunt like Karen's again. And then, something even more heartwarming happened. One afternoon, my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, knocked on my door. The woman hardly ever left her house, so I was surprised to see her standing there, holding a homemade apple pie. "I heard about your tree," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "I know it might sound silly, but losing a tree like that is like losing an old friend." I felt a lump form in my throat. She wasn't wrong. She handed me the pie, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small stack of books. "These belong to my husband. He loved gardening and landscaping. I thought maybe you'd want them to help plan what comes next." I took them, completely touched by the gesture. "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. That means a lot." And it didn't stop there. Over the next few days, neighbors stopped by constantly, offering support, sharing stories, and even brainstorming ideas for how to replace the oak. It was like Karen's insane attempt at revenge had accidentally done the opposite. It had brought the whole community together. Meanwhile, Karen's house sat empty and broken. She was still in jail, unable to make bail due to the severity of her charges. The massive hole in her roof remained, serving as a harsh reminder of her choices. And then, just when I thought things had finally settled, I got another unexpected visitor. One morning, as I was heading out for a hike, a black SUV pulled into my driveway. A middle-aged man in a suit stepped out. "Mr. Crawford?" he asked. "My name is Richard Dawson. I'm Karen's ex-husband." I tensed immediately. The last thing I wanted was more drama. "I just want to say," he sighed, rubbing the back of his neck, "I'm so sorry for what Karen has done to you." I frowned. I hadn't expected that. "She's been struggling with mental health issues since our divorce," Richard admitted. "That doesn't excuse anything, but I wanted to make things right." Then, he handed me a business card. "I contacted a specialist in historic trees. He works with a nursery that grows saplings from trees just like yours. If you're willing, I'd like to cover the cost of planting a new one." For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than anger. I felt hope. I stared at the business card in my hand, struggling to process what Richard had just said. "You're offering to pay for a new tree?" I asked, still wary. Richard nodded. "Karen may not have the money, but I do. It won't bring back what she destroyed, but maybe it can help in some way." For the first time in this entire ordeal, I felt something shift inside me. Up until now, all I had felt was anger and frustration. But Richard's gesture, it was genuine. It was an acknowledgement that something valuable had been lost. I exhaled deeply. Thank you. I appreciate that more than you know. Richard gave me a small nod. Also, I've already spoken to your lawyer. I'm covering all damages from Karen's actions. Tree removal, legal fees, everything. Whatever it takes to put this behind us. I didn't know what to say. The rage I had carried for weeks started to ease just a little. That afternoon, I made the call. The tree expert Richard recommended was a man named Dr. Simmons, a specialist in preserving historic trees. He told me that while nothing could replace my century-old oak, he had a 15-year-old white oak sapling, one that had been grown from the acorns of trees just like mine. It's not 100 years old, Dr. Simmons said, but if you plant it, nurture it, someday it will be. And so, 4 months after Karen's midnight attack, my neighbors gathered once again. This time, it wasn't for damage control. It was for a fresh start. In the spot where my old tree once stood, we planted the sapling. It looked small and fragile compared to its predecessor, but it also held so much promise. Elena organized a tree warming celebration where people brought food, drinks, and decorations. The kids even made hand-painted signs welcoming the new tree. James, the real HOA president, surprised me by unveiling a metal plaque that would be placed at the base of the tree. It read, "In honor of resilience, community, and new beginnings, may this tree grow strong, just as we have." As I looked around at my neighbors, glasses raised in a toast, I realized something. Karen Dawson had tried to destroy something beautiful, but in the end, all she did was bring us closer together. Life has a way of sorting things out. Sometimes the people who try to bring you down only end up lifting you higher. Karen Dawson came into my life as nothing but a nuisance, determined to control everything around her. She tried to intimidate, manipulate, and even destroy something precious to me. But in the end, karma worked faster than I ever could have imagined. Her own carelessness and arrogance led to her downfall, not me. I didn't have to seek revenge. Life took care of that on its own. And ironically, the very thing she tried to destroy, my tree, my peace, my sense of home, ended up bringing something even greater into my life. A stronger community, deeper friendships, and a fresh start. It's easy to let toxic people drag you down. But when you stand your ground and let the truth speak for itself, you'll find that life has a way of making things right. This story is a reminder that boundaries matter. Whether it's your property, your peace of mind, or your values, never let entitled people walk all over you. Stand firm, document everything, and trust that the truth will prevail. If you ever find yourself dealing with a toxic neighbor, coworker, or family member, don't stoop to their level. Instead, do what I did. Protect yourself, get legal advice, and let karma handle the rest. And most importantly, remember this. Sometimes, bad situations lead to incredible new beginnings.